In the shadowed corridors of Whitehall, in the winter of 1943, a quiet war of wits began, one that would never fire a single bullet, yet would shape the fate of millions. The Allies knew that to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation, they must launch the largest amphibious invasion in human history. But success hinged not just on strength, but on secrecy, on convincing Adolf Hitler and his high command that the invasion would strike elsewhere. From this desperate need was born Operation Fortitude, a deception so vast, so meticulously crafted, it would become the greatest ruse of the Second World War. The stakes could not have been higher. By early 1943, planning for what would become D-Day was already underway under the codename Operation Overlord. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower understood that if German forces were concentrated in Normandy on the 6th of June 1944, the landings could fail catastrophically. Intelligence suggested the Wehrmacht had nearly 60 divisions in Western Europe, enough to repel any assault if they knew where it would come. The solution? Make them look the wrong way and keep them looking. The roots of fortitude lay in a broader Allied deception strategy known as bodyguard, approved at the Tehran Conference in November 1943. Bodyguard aimed to mislead the Axis about the timing and location of Allied offensives throughout 1944. Within it, Fortitude was split into two complementary illusions. Fortitude North, which threatened a fictional invasion of Norway, and Fortitude South, the centerpiece designed to convince Berlin that the real invasion would target the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. To sell this lie, planners needed more than maps and memos. They needed an army that didn't exist. And so, the first United States Army group, FUSAG, was conjured into being. Headed by the formidable General George S. Patton, whose reputation alone struck fear into German intelligence, FUSAG was headquartered in southeast England, opposite the Pas-de-Calais. But Patton commanded no troops there, only plywood tanks, inflatable jeeps, canvas barracks, and miles of dummy landing craft bobbing in the Thames estuary. These props, crafted by Hollywood set designers and British engineers, were positioned with cinematic precision to be spotted by Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes, which rarely came, thanks to Allied air superiority. Yet the Germans, starved for reliable intelligence, clung to every grainy photo as proof. But hardware alone could not sustain a phantom army. Fortitude's true genius lay in its human dimension, its network of double agents, each a thread in a web of carefully curated lies. At the heart of this web was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish citizen codenamed GARBO. Posing as a fanatical Nazi sympathizer, he had convinced German intelligence to recruit him in 1941. In reality, he loathed fascism and offered his services to Britain. By 1944, GARBO ran a fictional spy ring of 27 sub-agents, none of whom existed, and fed Berlin a steady diet of plausible, yet misleading, intelligence. On the 5th of June 1944, just hours before the Normandy landings, GARBO sent a message so urgent it was transmitted in plain text. The invasion is imminent, but the main attack will come at Pas-de-Calais. The Germans believed him so thoroughly that they awarded him the Iron Cross. He was not alone. Agent BRUTUS, a Polish officer named Roman Czerniawski, reported from London that FUSAG was preparing for a massive strike across the Strait of Dover. Agent Treasure, a Portuguese socialite with a pet dog named Biscuit, passed along fabricated troop movements. And perhaps most crucially, the British had long since broken Germany's Enigma codes through the Ultra program at Bletchley Park. This allowed them to read German decrypts and confirm that the deception was working. When German radio traffic showed panzer divisions remaining near Calais weeks after D-Day, Allied planners knew Fortitude had succeeded. Yet this triumph carried a moral weight rarely spoken of in victory parades. To maintain the illusion, Eisenhower and his commanders made a harrowing choice. They would not reinforce the initial beachheads in Normandy as quickly as they might have, for fear of revealing that Normandy, not Calais, was the true target. Every hour of delay meant more Allied soldiers died on the beaches of Omaha and Juno. And in the skies above France, RAF and US AAF bombers continued to strike Calais with unusual intensity, not because it mattered strategically, but to preserve the lie. French civilians in those towns paid the price. Homes destroyed, families shattered, all in service of a secret they would never understand. The psychological warfare extended even to the airwaves. The 20 Committee, so named for the Roman numeral XX, symbolizing a double cross, orchestrated a symphony of fake radio traffic. Thousands of wireless operators, trained to mimic the signal patterns of real divisions, chattered day and night about fuel shortages, troop rotations, and supply delays, all pointing to an invasion date in mid-July, not early June. German radio intercept units, listening intently from occupied Europe, logged every transmission, weaving them into reports that climbed the chain of command straight to Hitler's desk. And Hitler, ever suspicious, ever convinced of Allied deviousness, took the bait. He had long believed Calais was the obvious target, the shortest crossing, the quickest route to the Ruhr. Even after reports of landings in Normandy reached his headquarters on June 6, he hesitated. "It's a feint," he told his generals. "The real blow will fall at Calais." For 7 critical weeks, the 15th Army, 19 divisions strong, including elite panzer units, remained in place, staring across the Channel at an empty horizon, while the Allies consolidated their foothold in Normandy. By late July, when the Germans finally realized the truth, it was too late. The beachhead had become a front. The front, a breakout. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, shattered German defenses, and Patton, now commanding real tanks, raced across France in a blitzkrieg of liberation. The Phantom Army had done its work. Operation Fortitude stands as a monument not to firepower, but to imagination, to the power of narrative over brute force. It cost nothing in steel, yet saved tens of thousands of lives. It relied not on courage in battle, but on patience, discipline, and the quiet heroism of men and women who lied for a living so others might live to see peace. In the annals of war, where truth is often the first casualty, Fortitude reminds us that sometimes the most powerful weapon is a story carefully told, perfectly timed, and believed by the right enemy. The success of Fortitude did not end on the beaches of Normandy. It rippled through the final year of the war, altering the course of history in ways both visible and unseen. Even as Allied troops pushed inland through the hedgerows of Normandy, the deception machinery hummed on. FUSAG remained active in southeast England well into August 1944, its radio traffic growing more urgent, its phantom divisions redeploying in response to fictional setbacks. The goal was no longer just to delay German reinforcements, it was to prevent a counteroffensive that could drive the Allies back into the sea. And it worked. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of German forces in the West, continued to warn Berlin that the Calais threat remained credible, a belief reinforced by intercepted ultra-decrypts, showing German staff officers still allocating reserves to the Pas-de-Calais region as late as mid-August. Yet behind the operational triumph lay a human toll that lingered long after the last dummy tank was dismantled. The double agents who risked everything: exposure, torture, execution, carried the psychological burden of lives lost to their carefully constructed fictions. Garbo, despite his Iron Cross and later an MBE from King George VI, reportedly struggled with guilt over the civilians killed in Calais during the diversionary bombing raids. "I told lies to save lives," he once confided to a British handler, "but how many died because of them?" The British intelligence services, bound by secrecy, could offer little solace. Many agents were never publicly acknowledged. Some vanished into obscurity, their contributions buried under decades of classified files. Meanwhile, the ethical calculus of strategic deception raised questions that still echo in military academies today. Was it justifiable to sacrifice truth and with it civilian safety for the greater good of hastening the end of a genocidal regime? Allied planners argued that without fortitude, D-Day might have failed, prolonging the war by months or even years, costing millions more lives across Europe and Asia. But the line between necessary subterfuge and moral compromise remained thin. In one particularly fraught instance, British intelligence allowed a German spy unwittingly feeding false information to believe his reports were reaching Berlin, when in fact he was being manipulated by MI5. When he was eventually arrested by the Gestapo on unrelated charges and executed, his British handlers could only watch in silence, unable to intervene without exposing the entire network. The legacy of fortitude also reshaped the very architecture of modern intelligence. The 20 Committee's success proved that coordinated deception, blending human intelligence, signals intelligence, psychological operations, and physical mimicry, could be a decisive force multiplier. After the war, many of its architects, including Colonel John Bevan, the quiet mastermind of Fortitude South, faded from public view, their work still classified, but their methods became doctrine. During the Cold War, similar principles would underpin operations from Berlin to Beirut. Even today, cyber deception and information warfare owe a debt to the inflatable tanks and forged radio logs of 1944. Ironically, the Germans themselves had been pioneers of military deception. Hitler's 1940 feint through the Ardennes had stunned the world. But by 1944, the Nazi intelligence apparatus was fractured, paranoid, and riddled with sycophants who told the Führer only what he wanted to hear. Hitler's own strategic rigidity became Fortitude's greatest ally. He had fixated on Calais not because of overwhelming evidence, but because it fit his worldview. The Allies would take the shortest, most logical route. The British and Americans, understanding this cognitive bias, tailored their lies to flatter his assumptions. In the end, Fortitude succeeded not because it was flawless, but because it played perfectly to the enemy's psychology. Back in England, as summer turned to autumn in 1944, the last remnants of FUSAG were quietly dismantled. The plywood tanks were burned, the canvas barracks folded away. The wireless operators who had spent months mimicking the chatter of non-existent regiments returned to real units or civilian life. Few knew the full scope of what they'd accomplished. Secrecy orders remained in place for decades. It wasn't until the 1970 seconds, with the gradual declassification of wartime records, that the full brilliance of Operation Fortitude emerged into public view, revealing a campaign where imagination had been as vital as artillery, and where silence had been as powerful as any weapon. And yet, for all its sophistication, Fortitude's ultimate power lay in its simplicity. It asked the enemy to believe a story they already wanted to believe. In a war defined by industrial slaughter and ideological extremism, this quiet, cerebral battle fought with typewriters, radios, and rubber tanks proved that sometimes the most devastating strike is the one the enemy never sees coming, because they're looking in the wrong direction. On the morning of the 6th of June 1944, as the first Allied troops waded ashore under withering fire, German commanders in Calais were still awaiting the main invasion. They waited through the day, through the week, through the month. By the time they realized the truth, the tide of history had already turned. Not with a roar, but with a whisper, a lie, and the unwavering discipline of those who knew that in war, perception is not just reality, it is victory. The echoes of fortitude reached far beyond the fields of France. In the war rooms of Tokyo, Japanese intelligence analysts pored over reports of the European deception, drawing cautious lessons for their own defense of the Pacific Islands. Though they lacked the resources to replicate such an elaborate charade, the principle that an enemy's expectations could be weaponized resonated deeply. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Stalin, ever suspicious of his Western allies, had long doubted their commitment to opening a second front. But when fortitude succeeded and D-Day unfolded without catastrophic failure, even the Soviet leader grudgingly acknowledged the Allies' operational genius. The deception, in its own subtle way, helped preserve the fragile Grand Alliance at a pivotal moment. Yet for all its global reverberations, fortitude's most enduring impact was felt in the quiet corners of post-war Britain. The artists, carpenters, and radio technicians who built the illusion returned to ordinary lives, their wartime roles sealed under the Official Secrets Act. One such man, Charles Fraser Smith, a designer of Q devices for the Special Operations Executive, had crafted everything from exploding rats to collapsible canoes, but also contributed to fortitude's visual deception. He later joked that his greatest creation was a tank that weighed less than a teacup. His work, like so much of the operation, remained classified until the 1,990 seconds. Only then could veterans gather at reunions and finally speak of the army that never was. The moral ambiguity of fortitude also left a quiet imprint on international law. While wartime deception has always been considered legitimate under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, ruses de guerre are explicitly permitted. The scale and sophistication of fortitude pushed the boundaries of what was ethically acceptable. The deliberate targeting of civilian areas in Calais to reinforce the illusion, for instance, skirted the edge of permissible conduct. Post-war tribunals chose not to scrutinize Allied deception tactics, focusing instead on Axis atrocities. But military ethicists continue to debate where the line should be drawn. When does strategic necessity override the duty to minimize non-combatant harm? Fortitude remains a case study in that unresolved tension. In the decades that followed, historians would uncover one final, haunting layer to the story. German intelligence had, in fact, received credible reports from resistance networks in Normandy, indicating unusual Allied activity in the spring of 1944. But these warnings were drowned out by the sheer volume of fortitude's orchestrated noise. The double agents' reports, reinforced by fake radio traffic and aerial reconnaissance, created a cognitive overload, a truth deficit, so profound that even accurate intelligence was dismissed as disinformation. It was a chilling demonstration of how a well-crafted narrative can blind even seasoned professionals to reality. In our own age of deepfakes and information warfare, Fortitude serves as both a blueprint and a warning. And what of the man whose name became synonymous with the Phantom Army? General George Patton, though sidelined during the initial D-Day landings due to his volatile temperament, was reinstated in July 1944 to lead the real Third Army. His lightning advance across France, covering over 600 miles in under 3 months, vindicated the fear his name had instilled in German planners. Ironically, the very reputation that made him the perfect figurehead for a fake army also made him indispensable in the real one. He never publicly spoke of his role in Fortitude. It was beneath the dignity of a warrior, perhaps. But in private letters, he admitted a grudging admiration for the theater of war waged by men in suits rather than uniforms. As the 75th anniversary of D-Day approached in 2019, surviving veterans of Fortitude, now in their late 90s, gathered at the Imperial War Museum in London. Among them was a former wireless operator who had spent weeks in a damp hut near Dover, tapping out fake orders for the 2nd Armored Division, a unit that existed only in German intelligence files. When asked how it felt to have helped win the war without ever firing a shot, he paused, then said simply, "We didn't win it. We just gave the boys on the beach a fighting chance." That, perhaps, is the quiet truth at the heart of Operation Fortitude. It was not about glory or grand strategy alone. It was about buying time, hours, days, weeks, that allowed young men from Kansas, Kent, and Calgary to survive long enough to dig in, link up, and begin the long march toward Berlin. In the calculus of war, where every second costs lives, Fortitude was a gift of time, wrapped in lies, sealed with courage, and delivered not by bombers or battleships, but by the steady hands of those who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one the enemy never sees because it doesn't exist. And so, as the sun rose over Omaha Beach on the 6th of June 1944, casting long shadows over the wreckage of landing craft and the bodies of the fallen, somewhere in a command bunker near Calais, a German officer marked another day on his calendar, still waiting for the main invasion that would never come. The greatest deception of the war was not merely that the Allies made the Germans believe a lie, but that they made them keep believing it, long after the truth had already changed the world. The story of Operation Fortitude, however, does not end with the liberation of Paris, or even with Germany's surrender in May 1945. Its legacy seeped into the very foundations of modern intelligence culture, shaping not only how wars are fought, but how nations protect their secrets and manipulate perception in peacetime. The techniques refined in 1944 became the DNA of Cold War espionage, the cultivation of double agents, the orchestration of false flag operations, the fusion of technical and human intelligence into a seamless narrative. MI6 and the newly formed CIA studied Fortitude's playbook as if it were scripture. In the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, for instance, American analysts deliberately leaked misleading information about U.S. naval movements, echoing the radio deception of FUSAG, to influence Soviet decision-making. The ghost of Fortitude was in the room. Yet for all its institutional influence, the operation remained largely unknown to the public for over a quarter of a century. The British government maintained strict secrecy, fearing that revealing the extent of their wartime deception might compromise ongoing intelligence methods or expose still active agents. It wasn't until 1974, with the publication of The Deceivers by Thaddeus Holt and the gradual release of wartime archives, that the full scope of Fortitude emerged. Even then, many details remained classified. Garbo's true identity Juan Pujol Garcia, was only confirmed in the 1,980 seconds after a British historian tracked him down running a small hotel in Venezuela. When asked why he had risked everything to deceive the Nazis, Pujol simply replied, "Because lies can be noble when they serve the truth." This paradox that deception can be an instrument of justice lies at the moral core of fortitude. In a conflict defined by industrialized murder and ideological fanaticism, the Allies chose subtlety over slaughter, cunning over carnage. They understood that overwhelming force alone might not be enough, that the mind of the enemy, once misled, could be held in place more effectively than any trench or tank. And in doing so, they saved not only Allied lives, but countless French civilians who would have perished in a prolonged, indecisive battle for the beaches. Historians estimate that fortitude shortened the war in Europe by weeks, if not months, translating to hundreds of thousands of lives spared across battlefronts and concentration camps alike. But the human cost of secrecy endured long after the guns fell silent. Families of Fortitude's participants often lived in ignorance of their loved ones' roles. One radio operator's widow only learned of her husband's contribution when she found a dusty commendation letter hidden in his desk decades after his death. Others carried the weight of their silence to the grave. The psychological toll of living a double life, even in service to a just cause, left invisible scars. In the 1,950 seconds, several former deception officers struggled with what we now recognize as moral injury, not from acts of violence, but from the sustained performance of falsehood, however necessary. Meanwhile, in Germany, the myth of the stab in the back, that the Wehrmacht had been undefeated in the field but betrayed by weak leadership, gained new traction in post-war memoirs. Some former generals pointed to Allied deception as proof that they had been outmaneuvered not by superior force, but by trickery. This narrative, while self-serving, inadvertently validated Fortitude's success. If even defeated commanders credited the Allies with near supernatural cunning, then the illusion had been total. Today, at the D-Day landing beaches, tourists walk past monuments to courage and sacrifice, but few pause to consider the invisible battle that made those landings possible. There is no statue to the inflatable Sherman tank, no memorial to the wireless operator who mimicked the call sign of a non-existent artillery battalion. Yet without them, the stone memorials might never have been built. In recent years, historians and filmmakers have worked to correct this omission. Exhibits at Bletchley Park and the Imperial War Museum now feature replicas of Fortitude's props and transcripts of Garbo's messages. School children in Kent visit the fields where dummy airfields once stood, learning that war is not only fought with bullets, but with ideas. And in an age where digital disinformation spreads faster than any radio signal, the lessons of fortitude feel urgently contemporary. The operation succeeded not because it flooded the enemy with lies, but because it told a single, consistent story, one that aligned with the enemy's preconceptions and was reinforced through multiple credible channels. Today's adversaries, whether state or non-state, employ similar principles, though often without the ethical constraints that guided Allied planners. Fortitude reminds us that truth can be protected not just by revealing it, but sometimes by shielding it behind a carefully constructed fiction. As the last veterans of the Second World War fade from the world, their memories preserved in oral histories and grainy film reels, Operation Fortitude stands as a testament to a different kind of heroism, the quiet, cerebral courage of those who waged war with whispers instead of weapons. They did not storm the beaches, but they made the storm possible. They did not wear medals on their chests, But their legacy is etched into every liberated square, every free election, every child who grew up in a Europe unshackled from tyranny. In the end, the true measure of Fortitude's success is not found in German troop dispositions or intercepted radio logs, but in the simple fact that on the 6th of June, 1944, the Allies landed on the coast of Normandy and stayed, against staggering odds, under fire from fortified cliffs and machine gun nests. They held their ground. And they held it because, hundreds of miles away, an army that never existed kept Hitler's best divisions waiting for a battle that never came. That is the power of a story, told at the right time, to the right enemy, with unwavering conviction. And in the long annals of human conflict, few stories have ever changed the world so profoundly by convincing an empire to look away just long enough for freedom to take root.